foul, tarnished, bring your maiden-less self over and sit down by the grace of all that is golden, the grace that will cleanse your filth and bring upon a new age for the lands between. Take up your mission, find and claim the throne, fill the world with madness, and reclaim destined death denied to it. Join the fingers in their fight against the forces who seek to destroy them. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and welcome to Soul Searching Episode 5, this time covering Elden Ring. Now, if you're new here, Soul Searching is the series where I examine what life lessons I've learned or reinforced by a certain game and how I feel about the game in light of my experience with it. I will then look at the souls of the developers to see what goals they have set for themselves to determine whether they have met those goals. So to start off, I was really excited in the years leading up to Elden Ring's release. I was coming off of the feeling of getting, all achievements in the numbered souls entries. Links for the podcast episode will be in the description down below. And I was more than ready to do it again. I saw all the promotional material, watched so many YouTube videos, and was beyond hyped. I will say that I did not pre-order the game because I believe that is a practice that should never be implemented, especially given the recent state of PC releases. But that's a video for another time. Now, the boys and I had talked about this non-stop with plans to record and release a series, which we did, also linked in the description down below on John's channel. Weirdly enough though, John and I had also started solo characters before the start of our collective series, so we were both doing at least 2 playthroughs at the same time. I say at least because I have a funny feeling, and I can't remember accurately, if John had more than 2 characters going at one time. Now, we all had wild dreams about what an open world Souls like would actually, feel like, and especially play like. The possibility of all the different weapons and spells leading to different playstyles was enticing for them, but I got kind of disheartened because I realized that I didn't care as much about the variety, and it seemed like I would have a harder time to find, my style in the game. It was kind of overwhelming, and I wasn't chomping at the bit as nearly as much as I, learned more compared to the other two. Because unlike them, I really enjoyed Sekiro, as I'm sure if you watched the Soul Searching episode on that, again linked down below, you'll have noticed. And so I wasn't craving the exact Souls-like formula that From Software was known for. I was craving this new thing that I experienced in a singular, character-focused long adventure. But I was also, kind of excited for the possibility of this enticing open world with a whole bunch of stuff to do that wouldn't disappoint me. Now, at the time of this recording, I do have 175 hours in the game. I have all achievements, and the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion is still a few months out. I have done an episode of the podcast dedicated to this game, again, linked down below, along with the playthrough. Spoiler alert, I burnt myself out and had some troubles near the end of the game, but we'll get there. I will be talking about both playthroughs interchangeably because they kind of blended together until the end, where they diverged massively. So we started playing effectively on the release day, as in John and I started playing. Chris was busy because his kid was born shortly after the release of the game, so he was really busy with, preparing to be a dad than actually being a dad. So he had a lot less personal experience before we had all jumped in. It was truly an adventure, unlike any other I had experienced, at least from Software. It fit right in with other RPGs I had played though, and certainly had a different feel to it, but, kind of met that same core structure. The lands between were a lush, wide playground that I got to explore to my heart's content, but for some reason, I really didn't want to. I think this was the consequence of doing 2 playthroughs simultaneously. In the one I did with the guys, which I took more than 40 hours, really took the wind out of my sails when I added another 40-hour playthrough on top of it at the same time. Now, I mostly did the open world exploring with the guys, and didn't want to get too far ahead of my solo playthrough, but because of our schedules, we can only record, once or twice a month, and we would go for long periods of time without recording, so I didn't want to get too far ahead in the game and spoil things for myself or for them, so we could all kind of all experience it together. But there was a point where I just decided, hey, I want to finish this game. I want to get all achievements, and as I'll come to in a little bit, that was a huge mistake. Now, I swapped around playstyles a bit depending on which character we're talking about. Weirdly enough, in the co-op playthrough, I went for more of a bleed build because I wanted to represent Gyobu Masataka because I thought it'd be funny. And then I switched up my character name I don't know, like 3-4 times, but I still primarily focused on bleed builds. So I definitely left my, experimentation and kind of, I don't want to say fun having, but my willingness to branch out and try those different builds for the co-op playthrough, because it offered me more comfort and security knowing that Chris and John were there. They could cover for me in case I decided on a bad build, and it gave me a lot more opportunities to experiment without feeling like I was going to be punished for it. I think I even went over to the Briar Sword. I don't know the actual name of the sword. I'll have to look it up. I'll put it on screen once I find it. And that was an interesting one. I'm torn in terms of how I feel about the opportunities afforded to the player in terms of varied playstyles, because on one hand, I think it's fantastic. You let so many people play the character in way that they want to, and I will never say that's a bad thing. On the other hand, we come to the balancing issues of trying to account for all these different playstyles, and then some being very much stronger than others. For example, in my solo playthrough, which I did kind of rush from the middle to the end, this was before they had nerfed the Sword of Night and Flame, the one that could do a Faith Flamethrower attack, as well as the, oh boy, I can't even remember now, like the Magic Kamehameha wave. Again, I can't remember the name of the spell, it's been so long. But I switched into that in my solo playthrough as soon as I got it, because I realized this is insane and a lot of fun, because I'm normally a sword and shield kind of guy, but to get a one-handed sword that could do all of this stuff, all of this cool magic, I was like, you know what, let's try this out. And I had a lot of fun with it. And then I had a lot of fun experimenting, but at the same time, those balancing issues rear their ugly head, because the Sword of Night and Flame was so overpowered it had to be nerfed. Other things were so overpowered they had to be nerfed, and then other things buffed up, and it starts to feel mediocre. It starts to feel like no matter what you do, you're always going to be in this middle of the road kind of position. This also comes with the issue that the game is so long. At least for me, it discourages additional playthroughs. Like I said, I put in 175 hours, and that was in a much shorter time frame than I normally would put that time into a single game, especially a single game where I primarily focused on solo playthroughs. This was in the span of like a year, which for some people, they're going, oh, 175 hours in a year, that's not bad, that's not, too much. For me, it is, though. For me, if I was doing a single playthrough and that took 175 hours, that's one thing. When I'm doing multiple, which, again, I understand this is just me spouting problems that I created myself, but this was my experience. It was too much for me to put in that one short span of a year, which is weird to say it like that. But again, for me, too much time spent in such a short amount of time in this game. And again, I don't want to replay this game, not just because I have all achievements, but I would not, I don't think, go back and just do playthroughs to try out new builds. Like, to me, the Souls series, if you wanted to do a new build, and admittedly I didn't too much, was good because they were shorter games. You could blow through them in, less than 10 hours pretty easily, like without being really, really good at the game. And if you were really, really good, you could blow through it in like 2 hours. But that afforded you the brevity, the shortness to just say, okay, I want to try out this build and beat the game with it. That'll take me a couple hours, and then I'll try the next build. Take me a couple hours, so on and so forth. With Elden Ring, you either skip out on mountains of content to try and beat the game with that new build, or you're stuck, not slogging, I don't want to say slogging, but you're stuck on this long journey if you want to experience a lot of the main content with that build, only to find out, hey, this build kind of sucks for some bosses or some areas, which I am okay with. I am totally fine, but it doesn't offer the same opportunities or incentives to try out those different builds, because, at least in my mind, the experience is too long to afford you all that flexibility. Now, in terms of life lessons, I guess the game really cemented for me the love lost on the Souls formula. I feel like as I get older, I have less passion for it because I've experienced it so much, it doesn't feel new or unique anymore. It's just another action RPG for me. Now, I understand that is heavily demeaning to the Souls genre to put into a label far too basic to encompass all of its complexities, and I don't find myself wanting to play them as much anymore or enjoying them as much as I do when I play them outside of a select few, like, the numbered Souls titles, Elden Ring, Sekiro, which, all from Software. I do want to get Bloodborne, as in I hope it comes to PC one day. Demon Souls was fun. I really hope for the remake on PC, but I'm finding myself drawn to a lot of these bigger titles, because I've tried other titles like Wo Long, Liza P, Remnant from the Ashes, Thymesia, and I enjoyed most of them, but not all of them. And as the Souls genre becomes more popular, more expansive, I just find myself caring less and less, especially when it comes to such a long experience. And I learned that I can't seem to place Elden Ring above the more closely curated experiences of the numbered Souls titles. I love the combat and the variety of the weapons, but the open world experience, as I mentioned earlier, is just too vast and overwhelming at the time, and I feel like it still is. It's one of those things you experience once, but then you don't have the same incentives or desire, at least, again, for me personally, to go back and replay them. I also confirmed something that I had long suspected. The real draw for me in an RPG is the world itself, and I'm not gonna lie, the world of Elden Ring didn't feel as compelling as I wanted it to. Yes, there was all the really cool lore and all the interesting stuff, but there was so much going on that I didn't engage with, and I feel like was harder to parse because, and I'm gonna keep comparing it to the earlier Souls titles. I understand they are fundamentally different because those were not open world titles, and this is a completely different universe. It's still telling a similar story though, in terms of, the cycle of rebirth, the unwillingness to let go, all that kind of stuff. But I feel like you have so many more sub-stories going on that either are too hidden, or don't feed into the main story, or just are so spread out, it's not as easy to make them as interesting, at least for me. And, obviously coming into Elden Ring with expectations that it was going to feel like a Souls game, as in the numbered Souls series, is a big problem. And those expectations either weren't met or were circumvented. I didn't want to acknowledge the game. I simply wanted to say it wasn't the game for me, or that I would focus on the negatives of said game. I want to clarify that I do still love Elden Ring, and as I type this script, I think back to all the good times and the memorable boss fights I had. I want to relive those, but the magic is just gone for me. I did it once, and that was enough for what I wanted. Though, through my experience, John and I would both agree this is one of the best games of all time, and I'm assuming Chris also agrees with that. Their outlook on Sekiro, which actually, as of this recording, John's outlook on Sekiro might have changed, so I'm really curious to see how that develops. Through my experience with this game, I start to understand a little bit more about how Chris and John felt towards Sekiro, which, funnily enough, at the time of this recording, on the day of this recording, John left a comment on my Sekiro soul searching video saying that his opinions might be changing, and he might want to try it again, so I really do hope that worked out for you, John. I really encourage you to give it a shot, to kind of, try again at that first impression. Try again to see how you feel about it. But I understand, because their expectations were not met, or they were sidestepped and subverted, and, some people started calling Sekiro a bad game, which I would heavily disagree with, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me if I say Elden Ring is not the best game of all time. I do enjoy it, and I think I don't have as much animosity towards it as Chris and John held towards Sekiro, but it is by no means my favorite game of all time. I think it's a great game. I do love it. It is not one of my favorites because of the reasons that I'd already laid out. I think it confirmed for me that I sometimes prefer a more linear game that has more balanced mechanics and a smaller selection of weapons to choose from. Now, I want to stress I fully understand the amount of work that has gone into balancing the game. For all the complaining that I've done, I cannot imagine how much time would have gone into balancing, nerfing, buffing certain mechanics, especially as players have shown, exploits and things like that. Having to deal with all that would be insane. And the fact you can play this with up to 3 people, or even on horseback, adds in so many more variables that would create so many more problems and even more work for the game designers, that I do want to acknowledge all the hard work that has gone in here, and I don't want to call the game unbalanced or, poorly optimized, because they did the best they could. And especially with this being a follow-up game after Sekiro, which was, very singular character focused, very singular main weapon focused. Yes, you had some variety with the shinobi weapons, but the variety was so much smaller that they could really focus in and hone in on those mechanics, whereas they couldn't with Elden Ring. And I think that's really what kind of hurt it in my mind. Additionally, this cemented the idea, for me at least, that when I get all the achievements in a game, that is enough for me to say goodbye, and I should stop playing, because I will not necessarily hate my time afterwards, but it will certainly feel diminished. This was the case with Elden Ring. I wrapped the game in my solo playthrough and got all achievements, and we were about 75% of the way through the co-op one, and the remaining time was bearable because I had the guys with me, but I don't think I would have done it on my own. I fully recognize I diminished my own experience, and it's my own fault, and I will say that throughout this entire video, for finishing the game early without the guys, because it does stand as one of my longest playthroughs, and I was getting impatient. I have also noticed, and this game was again a unfortunate slap in the face, that when I get really close to completing something, I tunnel vision like crazy. I just want to get it done because then I can have it off my plate, I can stop thinking about it, and it goes from being an enjoyable experience to a stressful one because I stop saying, hey, I'm having fun with this, let's get all achievements, yeah, to I'm so close, just one more, like, let's go, let's just get this done, let's just get this off our plate. Like, I purposefully, unintentionally, make it a stressful experience for myself, and this was certainly the case with Elden Ring. It also confirmed something else for me. The fact that I should never get all achievements in my first playthrough. Not from a difficulty or timing perspective, but merely the fact that I haven't given myself enough time to appreciate the game for what it is before setting out to say goodbye. I was so gung-ho to complete the all achievements for it, because I had done so for the other From Software titles, and wanted to add it to the collection, that I didn't take the time to stop and smell the roa fruit. The whole experience was too packed and rushed for me to get a great feel or idea for the game, and looking back on it now, it's almost 200 hours that I realize just how much that has impacted my perceptions of it. It's rare for me to put that many hours into one game, and rarer still for me to put all that time into the game in the span of little less than a year, because the series took so much time to record with those spaces in between. I always knew it was too much, but having more than a year to think about it, I'm finally able to fully put into context and better understand my own experiences. Elden Ring serves as a great reminder to stop and slow down. All too often we're eager to move on to the next thing, and most of the time that new thing isn't as fun as the thing we left it for. Appreciate what you have, not what you could have. You will never look at your current possessions with actual appreciation. You will focus on what they don't do as opposed to what it can do. Taking a step back, I'm able to recognize the way I treated Elden Ring is not what it deserved, and I have ruined my chance at a solid first impression when looking at the experience as a whole. I was consumed by the journey for all achievements and dived way too deep into the game. So, Elden Ring, to From Software, and most of all, to Chris and John, I'm sorry for the way I treated this game near the end of our journey. I appreciate the time I've spent with the game, and I look forward to the DLC coming out next month. As of time of this release, I should clarify, looking back, I don't regret a single second of the game, but I think I've become a little too burnt out on the genre as a whole, and getting a sprawling open world of it was just too much for me. I also want to say, don't let yourself get too caught up in whatever you're doing currently. I'm recording this in April. I have the 2-year anniversary of the channel coming out in May, the month that this releases, and that is a very special episode of the Overachievers podcast. Please make sure to check it out, because again, that is celebrating 2 years of the channel, 2 years of me going for all achievements in the podcast, and playing games, and talking about my thoughts of Soul series and all that kind of stuff. But there are times, especially around the time that I completed Elden Ring, that I got way too focused on that. It became not necessarily my personality, but my whole life, for better or worse, which was absolutely worse. Don't tunnel vision. Don't focus on just one thing, because life is complicated. Life has so many aspects to it, and when we focus on just that one thing, we forget about the people and the other things in our lives, the other things around us. And it can be really problematic. It can be akin to the beginning stages of an addiction. Now, I don't want in any way to compare a video game and my experiences with it to actual consumption of dangerous substances and the addictions that those can lead to, because I've seen that happen. And it's because I've seen that happen that I can recognize where I was going and the mindset that I can get into sometimes when you become so singularly focused on one thing, you ignore the rest of the world. Okay, so just, if you feel like you're in that mindset, take a step back, whether it be, gaming or work or some kind of project that you're working on. If you're able to, mind you, don't, just call into work for a week and, lose your job and stop making money. If you're able to, take a week where you don't touch, you don't think about, you don't even talk about whatever that thing you're so focused on is. No matter how close to completion you are, if you feel like you're in that tunnel vision mindset, just take a week. Take some time for yourself, take some time, especially for your loved ones, and then come back to it. See how you feel about it after that point, because you might find you have a whole new appreciation for what you've been doing that was lost during that tunnel vision period. Anyway, let's move on and see what the developers had in mind when they were making one of the best open world games of all time. So with the developers, there's a couple things I need to get out of the way right at the start. Yes, this game was developed in collaboration with George R.R. Martin, the writer of the Game of Thrones series, though his contributions were to the history and background information of the game, not the main story or anything the player experiences, just a lot of the lore in the background bits. And this game started production in 2017 alongside Sekiro, so a lot of the lessons and things taken away from Sekiro wouldn't necessarily have applied themselves to Elden Ring's development, because Elden Ring would have been too far into development by the time that Sekiro had released for it to be really implemented. So some of the criticisms or commentary that I have on it as opposed to Sekiro are nullified by that fact. And, you know, the big elephant in the room is this was developed during the pandemic primarily. You know, they really kicked off development in 2017 after the development of the Dark Souls 3 Ring City DLC, which, funny, Ring City, Elden Ring, ha ha ha. But, you know, the pandemic hit us all really hard, especially game developers. And they had to delay the game because of that. So I want to acknowledge all three of those bits of information as we go through this. Now, thankfully, they had established a good, they being From Software, relationship with, Mr. Martin, and they made it very clear, hey, we want you to design the backstory, we want you to design, historical events, not the in-game story, because they felt that it would actually limit his capabilities. But I also believe this was more of they need to have control of the story so they can properly, design the levels, design the bosses and everything around their ideas, as opposed to trying to work with all of his ideas, just because that would severely lengthen the process. Now, I have not read any of Mr. Martin's books. I've watched a little bit of the series, just personally not too interested in it, but it's interesting to me that they were willing to team up and kind of, go with that as an approach. Now, the basic core concept of the original Souls games was, fire, rebirth, cycle, and the basic core elements for Elden Ring very much seem to be freedom. So that freedom comes in the form of how the player is able to, move and traverse the world, the skill sets and weapons they're able to use, all the way down to Ashes of War and, freedom of choice, but we'll get into that. So they definitely started with broad ideas in terms of the lore, mythos, broad ideas and themes that were all kind of swim around in this big pool, and they kind of picked out the ones that they felt would work, but they were all very loose and, quite vague ideas, so they could really bring in this concrete notion, start fleshing out what they really wanted it to be. They used Mr. Martin's works, as well as works such as The Lord of the Rings, kind of Western fantasy, Skyrim, Zelda, a lot of these things to kind of build up what they wanted. They do say that the general, approach of how they make games did not change except for the sense of scale, which was very much magnified. And one of the benefits of the increased scale was that it allowed them to convey a lot more details and elements that they might not have been able to with that smaller scale, which I think was really interesting. They do claim there was a number of challenges related to the scope of the game, and I absolutely believe that. This game is massive, and there's a lot of areas that they seemingly had to use trial and error for, similar to the Soul series, but allowing them to expand and go beyond what they've done in the Soul series affords them more opportunities, which also means more experimentation. Miyazaki does claim that Elden Ring is a culmination, a collection of everything that he's done before. So there are no universes, no timelines in which Elden Ring could have come before any of the other games that it did, because it needed those games, those experiences, to create what it is at its core. And he wanted to create something new, something that was not necessarily the ultimate experience, but the ultimate accumulation of all of his knowledge, of all of the team's knowledge, to really implement that into one game. And again, he wanted that freedom as an option for exploration. He wanted the players to decide, hey, Do I want to take this on horseback or do I want to take this on foot? Do I want to use magic and incantations or do I want to use a big buff hammer? In relation to that, they actually had debated putting spells and incantations into even more subcategories, but the problem was that would pigeonhole players into very specific playstyles and very specific roles if they wanted to use certain spells. So, in the name of player freedom, they went with the two of incantations and spells. Now, interestingly enough, Yui Tanemura, who had previously co-directed Dark Souls 3, was a director on Dark Souls 2, served as a co-director for Elden Ring as well. Now, as far as I understand it, they kind of use these co-directors in the beginning processes of development, and then it will go on to, be reviewed and evaluated by Miyazaki at a certain point when it's far enough along, and he will then take up the reins alongside the co-director. This is how he's able to direct a lot of different games simultaneously, such as, Sekiro and then Elden Ring. So, I do want to acknowledge Yui Tanemura's and everyone else's contributions to this game, and I can absolutely see some of the influences from Dark Souls 2 in here in terms of just how expansive the world is, how many bosses there are, and the unfortunate circumstance that they are a roller coaster. Some are really good, some are not so good, and that's just a consequence of having this many bosses in the game. Now, the aim, according to Miyazaki, was to give the world a mythological, fantastical, painting-like look with a feeling of romanticism and solitude. Freedom, again, freedom, was high priority. The game was designed to let players go into different areas in whatever order they liked to some degree, and of course there were some areas blocked by a big boss that may be hard to get past. And regarding, the main story, that's why they implemented the Guidance of Grace. They wanted players to be able to explore the world, but then still find their way back home. They don't want to give complete freedom with no direction. They want to give large amounts of freedom with minimal intrusive direction so that you can still get to where they want you to go, experience the things they want you to see, and have that high level of freedom. This is also where the Ashes of War comes into play, because you're able to equip, different Ashes of War onto different weapons. That allows for even more player freedom and customizability by letting you pick whatever, within reason, whatever weapon you want, and applying a specific Ash of War, whether that be for the scaling, or the unique attack that it does, and it results in a lot of different combinations that let you play the way you want to. This actually was also part of the multiplayer strategy, so he wanted to make it easier for people to participate together. Again, exploring that sense of freedom. Sorry, a lot of the interviews I read just use the word freedom so much, I felt like an American Eagle should be flying across with two M16s. They didn't want to limit it to just messages and bloodstains. They wanted, and obviously you could still summon in earlier games, but they wanted even more multiplayer and cooperative exploration because of the freedom it allowed players. Funnily enough, this is the end of one of the interviews I was reading. Miyazaki was asked for tips on new players and how to enjoy the game. And Miyazaki says, try not to optimize things and just relax. Don't fear death and enjoy the trial and error process, which is part of it. That is the way of enjoying a game that they intended. Now, this one hit me. So, I'm going to come back to this quote, but let's just quickly talk about what they had intended and whether or not they achieved it. I absolutely feel like they've achieved everything they set out to do. They created this sprawling open world that was very fantasy inspired, really awesome to explore in some parts. I definitely liked some more than others. There was a huge sense of freedom, and I think they've done everything they wanted to, but that sense of freedom is where I clashed with the game, because, and I've mentioned this before, vaguely, that I have a big problem with sandbox games, not because I think they're bad, but I have a problem with that lack of direction, that lack of objective. Now, obviously, Elden Ring has the guiding grace that tells you where to go, but it's in that open world exploration that I get so stressed out because I want to either do everything or just do all the side quests and maybe not like the miscellaneous stuff, that I start stressing myself out thinking, oh, am I missing something? Oh, am I not doing something right? Oh, am I not optimized to just kill this massive super boss? Looking at you, Melania. And I did not play the game the way the developers intended. So that's why I wanted to come back to the quote of Miyazaki saying, enjoy it, use the trial and error process. I realized something very critical when I look back on this game. I played it at the wrong time, with the wrong mindset. As I've mentioned, I played it with that mindset to get all achievements because I had just finished getting all achievements in the other games. I didn't come into this game with a relaxed and relaxing mindset. I came in with the mindset of get the job done and move on. So, as much as I've beaten that dead horse, in this video, I want to, again, just stress, take your time, enjoy the experience, and don't come into it with the expectation that you're going to finish it super early and just move on. Don't make it a checklist. Make it an experience. And with that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, so much for being here, especially if you've been following the Soul Searching series. I think it's important, not just for me, but for others to just hear, an experience from someone who they may relate to, in the sense that maybe you're going through something similar. And if you're not, maybe you will in the future. For your sake, I hope not, because these have been eye-opening and not always in a good way, not always in a fun way. Anyway, I appreciate you listening to my ramblings. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!